Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar being brought to you by CityIQ and Appian. My name is Paul Wiltshire, I work for CityIQ and I'm one of today's co-presenters. For those of you who don't know us, we are a UK-based consultancy specialising in the financial services industry. We've been in business since about 1997 and worked with around 100 organisations in the sector, primarily in the investment management space. Anybody interested in finding out more about us, I won't bore you now, but you can just visit our website. Our title today is Transforming Client Onboarding at Digital Speed. Now why onboarding? About 2.5 years ago, we started collaborating, and I say we, I mean Appian and CityIQ, in this space. We researched areas that we thought would be of interest to our client base. And one of the things that became clear quite quickly was the fact that onboarding was an area that wasn't necessarily being addressed. We advertised initially for a briefing and then a workshop, and we were surprised by the sheer volume of people who turned up. Because, as I say, quite simply, there wasn't a lot of work going on in this particular area. One of the things I'm going to do today is to basically reference those sessions we ran 2 years ago, which effectively looked at the key constituents of onboarding and how it differed from organisation to organisation. What I'll do, I'll introduce Guy in a minute. Before we get into the detail, I should mention that anyone who works in or near London might like to know we have a breakfast briefing next Wednesday, the 14th, where we're debating the topics raised here today. So further details on that and a link to registration can be found on either of our websites. Well, let's look now at what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this session. We're going to start by setting the scene. We're going to give context around the issues associated with onboarding, and we're going to look at why technology can help you move things forward. We're then going to move on to looking at market dynamics, at which point Guy will take you through that, and we will then consider where and how technology can be deployed. Before stopping, excuse me, just caught my breath there. Before stopping to break down the constituents, or rather the component parts of a digital platform, and a technological one as well. Then we're going to pick up with a few industry examples before we discuss how the technology can help us to manage change and the issues we currently face. At that point, before we finalise, we're going to talk also about, I've just read that point, excuse me. At that point, we'll take a deep breath, I'll get my points in order, provide a summary, and attempt to answer any questions that you may wish. So before the scene set, what I'll do is I'll take a step back and I will just let Guy introduce himself. Over to Guy.
Hi, my name is Guy Metric. I'm the Financial Services Practice Leader for Appian across the EMEA region. It's my role to help bridge the gap between Appian as a technology company and our financial services clients. So hopefully I can give a bit of insight into how people are using our solutions effectively within FS.
Okay, staying on this slide, a bit of a scene set. Client onboarding, not surprisingly, is something that most organisations just have to do. Now, whether you're business to business or whether you're business to consumer, whether you have 5 customers or 5 million customers, or whether the client signs up for one product or everything you offer, you still need to get them on board your platform. Now, most organisations don't find this straightforward. It's a process that cuts across departments, it cuts across systems. If it's done well, it can bring lots of advantages, not least with regards to on-selling. If it's done badly, well, we all know what happens when it's done badly. The last event we did on onboarding, we had 41% of those who took part had an onboarding process that they thought had caused problems or was simply not up to the job. So there are opportunities here. And with that, what I'm going to do, I think, is to hand over to Guy, who's going to look at market dynamics and how they are changing.
Thank you. What I think is interesting here is change has always been a part of financial services. And as you can see on this slide, there are 3 sort of drivers for change within the industry at the moment. You have this technology innovation, which is all about artificial intelligence, robotics, fintech, blockchain. You have increasing client expectations based on the fact that they have exposure to this new technology, and because of that, their expectations are continually increasing in terms of how and where and how quickly they gather services. And then finally, you have the evolving regulations within the industry that are both reacting to these technology changes, but also trying to drive change within the organizations that they manage. And I think PSD2 is a great example of that, because this is a way of opening up payments infrastructure to a much wider audience and to provide competition and a vastly increased range of services. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. But I think one of the main features of this is that there is so much change taking place, but also the speed of change is increasing. And that means that the old ways of implementing new solutions and services are no longer valid, because you need to be able to react at the rate of change at which the market is changing. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future.
Just one question on that, Guy. You talk about the fact that client expectations are changing. Do you think? Why do you think that clients are becoming more demanding? What's actually changing that position for them?
I think there's a number of reasons. I think social media, things like Facebook, Instagram. I think it's in the name there. People are used to being able to use mobile technology to share, events in their personal lives, and they have similar expectations around the way they manage their finances. I also think that as technology develops and grows, I think that people's way in which they want to interact with that technology has also risen to that challenge as well. And I think that has then led to this real demand for other services. And although I think that financial services has been typically a bit of a laggard when it comes to the deployment of new channels and new technology, I think that they can't ignore what's happening in other aspects of people's lives, and they have to react and change in order to meet these new expectations.
Thank you. I think last time we did one of these webinars, I think somebody made an excellent point and said effectively that whereas historically technology resided at work and it was something that you touched upon at home, these days we're surrounded by technology at home. And quite frankly, the technology at home is often better than the technology at work. So the expectation, I think, is driven partly out of that. If I can get these apps on my phone, why does it take 3 months to actually offer a service back when I get to work? So I think there's a bit of that in there as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's also this whole idea of people and work is blurring, because people are now doing home working. They want to be able to work on the move. No matter where they are in the world, they want the ability to be able to access services and systems using the tools for which they have at hand, which is often an iPad or a mobile phone or a smartphone, etc.
So it's new technology very much, it sounds like, that's driving the change and driving the expectation. Do you want to take us through a bit more about exactly what that means in terms of getting it out there in the business world?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at this slide, there are 3 elements to it. It's the customer journey, which is something which is so important to people who have not only in the retail space where you have millions of retail users, but also in the corporate space where you have significant relationships with other corporate organizations and entities. Getting it right, getting the onboarding of that client into your infrastructure correct is one of the most important elements to the way that you will interact with that client in the future. It also sets all of the expectations about how they believe that your organization will service them in the future, and therefore it's a critical point to get absolutely correct. And as we've seen, onboarding can be a complex process in itself. However, it is really just the start of that journey. And what I mean by that is if you get that client onboarding capability correct, and you create this single view of your client that you can then use across your whole organization, then what that allows you to do is when that client then starts to interact with your company in the future, when you need to engage in operations to actually make changes or provide new services or answer queries or investigations that they might have, all of that information is there in a single view. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to share that information within your organization to the people who are touching your customers. It could be in the branches, it could be in a call center, it could be on mobile, anywhere where that person or organization needs access to that data. And if you do the onboarding right, then that will stand you in good stead for the entire relationship that you have with that customer in the future. And then finally, if we look at the last part of this slide, governance, risk and compliance, you cannot now separate that as an entity from all of the other interactions that you have with your client. GRC needs to be really embedded into every process that you have within your organization. If you think about the levels of risk and compliance that you have within your organization, there are a whole load of regulations that affect directly the client and how you interact with the client, treating customers fairly, best execution, etc. You need to be able to have access to that information and be able to demonstrate that you are following those processes from day one. Clearly, you need that GRC capability in your business operations because there's a huge amount of risk and a huge amount of regulation that affects those processes. And you need to have that risk and compliance embedded into those operations. And then finally, you have those departments that are wholly focused on managing the governance and risk within your organization, and they need access to this aggregated data across the whole organization so that they understand what the total exposure and what the total requirements are that your business has for its compliance requirements. Because at the end of the day, the reporting that's going back to the regulator is increasing, and they're getting involved in much more specific elements of your business as their ability to be able to collate that data and receive it and analyze it increases. And again, that's through the use of greater technology.
Building on what Guy just said, we've looked at market dynamic deploying technology, but let's pause for a moment to think about the components of the problem we're trying to solve. As mentioned earlier, onboarding will be different from company to company. That said, there are always common strands. At an onboarding workshop we ran back in 2015, we worked with a group of our clients to identify what was common to all, and this is what we found. Let me just give you a few seconds to view the slide. I won't go through every box in detail, but I think the headings are self-explanatory. But obviously, what I would say is that the activities described here touch on an awful lot of business functions. If you think about it, it's sales, it's operations, it's IT, finance, compliance, risk. I've missed a couple, but effectively, everybody has a role to play in onboarding. For an application to do that, it needs to be cross-function, and you need a platform that's going to be fit for purpose and that can cover all of these areas. A lot of the organizations we talk to don't have that. They're talking about disparate platforms and disparate systems. So I think it's probably time for Guy to talk about the idea of a powerful digital platform that can cover all of this. So Guy.
So when you look at a platform for digital transformation, and that's applicable across client onboarding, back office, and also compliance, risk and governance, what you are trying to do is deliver solutions to the business in a timescale that meets the business requirements. And that generally is very, very short timescales because, as we've just discussed, there is an ever-increasing amount of change within the industry, and you need to be able to react to that in a timely fashion. And that's why a platform is probably the best way to deliver that kind of solutions and services that you're looking for in an agile way. And the components that make up that transformation platform, I think, are very important. So if you look at some of the elements that make up digital transformation, there is a low-code element. And low-code, by what we mean by that is it's not going back to Java or .NET. It's actually using an environment that allows both business and IT to rapidly implement functionality and services. And that, I think, is very important because we're talking about delivering applications within weeks, not months and years. Using a low-code environment, you can then really apply agile delivery principles. So this gives you the ability to try out new ideas as part of the various sprints that you're going through. If ideas work, you can deploy them into production. If they don't, you can change them. It allows you, if you're going to fail, it allows you to fail faster. You can fix the processes and then improve on them before you put them into production. So I think that's a key component. But low-code on its own isn't enough. The components of the artifacts that come with that, I don't believe allow you to be really agile. And that's why business process management capability within your platform is so important. And the reason for that is within business process management, you get all of the analytics and reporting that allow you to do the testing and allows you to do the business process improvement. And what that gives you then is so much faster time to actually deploy these systems, but then also do all of the analytics on them to make sure that they're performing in the right way. And then finally, you've got case management. And case management is important because that gives you the structure around which you can do your processing. And this could be either very, very structured processes like how do I process a payments claim, to how do I open an office in Tokyo or Luxembourg or wherever. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to create a framework by which you then can hang data and processes off. And I think that that's a very, very important capability as you look to rapidly deploy applications. And it's actually the combination of all three that gives you the ability to deploy quickly, but also deliver real value in a short time to the business.
Guy, sounds marvellous. Can you give us some examples, perhaps, of how organisations have adopted the idea of digital transformation and moved towards a digital platform?
I think a great example is Aviva, and we've been working with them for a number of years in a number of different areas. One of the first areas that we looked at were in their pensions processing and customer service environments. They had a real challenge because of the way that their organization was set up and the way that it had grown through acquisition, that they ended up having 17 different back-end systems from which they had to gain access to client information. And you had a situation where people in the call centers were having to toggle between all of those different systems in order to access the information they needed to service their clients within the pensions, to give them the value of their funds, to be able for them to switch pension funds, or even to do a simple address update. And what they were finding is that not only did it take too long to service those queries, but because there was such inconsistency in the way that the information was delivered, it was very difficult to get the information right first time. So what happened is you ended up with clients phoning back a number of times in order to try and resolve the queries. And they clearly realized that they had an issue and that they needed to, if you like, extract these data from these siloed back-end systems and within a digital layer be able to present that information to their client service operatives in a consistent way, irrespective of where that data came from. And so they used a combination of Appian's platform and the addition of a robotic process automation to access the data from a lot of these legacy systems that were difficult to build interfaces to. The robotic RPA applications presented the data to us in a way that we could then display in a consistent manner for the operatives to use. And the impact that that had was the reduction in the time to actually service processes, 9 times acceleration, because if, for instance, within an address change, that address change was done once in Appian, and Appian then pushed the data back to the back-end systems to update all of the legacy applications. In terms of the reductions in the cost of servicing those clients, but also, just as importantly, the ability to serve them in the correct way in a timely fashion, they managed to achieve 40% reductions in the services cost. But not only that, they were able to get the information right first time to those clients. And I think that that's a classic example of how a digital platform can help expose data that is in siloed back-end systems and allow that to be used across the organization in a very effective way. Now, clearly, because of the way that the company had grown, they weren't able to do that right first-time process because they had a number of legacy clients. So the customer onboarding is actually an application for the future to be delivered. And once they have streamlined that onboarding process, then a lot of these legacy issues should start to go away, because they will create that single view of their client in a way that they can then reuse more effectively across their group. But it's a great example of how digital transformation can help organizations with legacy issues deliver first-class services in the modern world. And I think it's something that is not unique to insurance, but I think it's something that can be put and used widely across financial services.
While you were talking there, Guy, I was thinking about the sorts of clients, the sorts of organisations that would benefit most. I was thinking of the sort of several constituencies. I'll add one now, which is the complex environment with multiple systems where you need to extract the data. So I'll put that as the first one. But I was thinking about high volume standard process organisations. I was thinking about low volume but more complex process environments. And then I was thinking about something you talked about earlier, which was about rapid solutions for something new. When something comes along that you've got to do something about it now. Does that tie in with your view about where to use a digital platform?
It's a very good point. I mean, if you look at where business process management has been done and utilized effectively in the past, it has really been around low complex, repetitive processes. So there will, a lot of those issues to a certain extent have either been addressed through BPM or more recently through the use of robotic process automation. I think the challenges that organizations now have is around the second part and the third part. It's where you have complex processes that involve people, data, wherever it may reside, and it could be in legacy back-end systems or it could be in third-party organizations, and processes, and bringing those together in an effective way that makes sense for the organization. I think that is still the major challenge that organizations have, combined with the fact that actually they have to deliver these solutions in a very rapid way in order to meet changing market conditions. And I think that is the real challenge around digital transformation. And I think you have to be very careful here, because there is a temptation to think about digital transformation as ripping out the old and starting again fresh. And that can be a highly risky and very expensive way of re-engineering your business. And we're certainly not advocating that. What we are talking about is effectively a digital platform on top of your legacy applications. So that is where your data should reside, because that is probably your golden source. And then what you want to try and do is use that data in a dynamic way at the time that you need to consume that data in a process. And then if there are any changes or updates, push that information back to the golden source of record for your data. And I think you can do that in a very transformative way, but project by project. So what that effectively means is you look at your business and you focus on where the major issues are. And it could be a small departmental project, it could be a larger operational issue, but you focus your efforts where you'll get most benefit. And you implement a platform, you provide the functionality, you create the views of your client or your product or your transaction, whatever's important to you, and you implement that solution, and you look at the benefit that you gain from that, and you do iterative improvements based on the feedback that you get from the technology itself. But then you use that to do the next project and the next project and the next project. And this can be done in very discrete ways. But however, what you end up with is digital transformation, but without the costs and the expense and the risk of trying to replace all of your legacy technology in a significant way. And that is another facet, I think, about agile delivery and quick delivery of your solutions, because it has a number of things. First of all, it takes a lot of cost out of deployment, because you're doing it in an iterative way, in a way that makes sense, and you're using less resources to do it because you're taking advantage of a low-code, rapid deployment platform. But also, more importantly, you're removing huge amounts of risk, because the issue with big waterfall projects is that you generally only know you're failing right at the end of the project. And again, this goes to my earlier point. With agile delivery, you have the ability to fail fast. You actually know if things are going wrong. You have the time and the platform to be able to reverse out of a particular process that's not delivering the value you thought you were, and then focus on another area. And therefore, I think that the advantages of using a platform that can be delivered agile is also a hugely important element of digital transformation.
Carl, thank you. You mentioned earlier about PSD2, wasn't it? You said you were going to give some examples around PSD2. Perhaps this will be a good time to pick up on that as well.
Yes.
I'm making you do all the talking here, guys.
No, it's absolutely fine. So PSD2 is a wonderful example of regulation by the European regulator, which is designed to disrupt and change the payments infrastructure within retail banking effectively. So it's coming live as of January of next year, and there's been a huge amount of discussion as to the transformative effect of this particular legislation and how it will impact banks and also retail clients moving forward. It's interesting because from a onboarding perspective, and I mean onboarding both from a client perspective, but also all of the third-party providers that will potentially be wanting to utilize a bank's information, it's important again that you get that side of it right, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute about why that is so key. So client onboarding and PSD2 I think are very closely linked, although not many people have made that link yet. Most organizations I think are focused on complying with the agreement, which is around delivery of an open API, and which will allow these third-party providers to access account information and initiate payments for and on behalf of the retail clients. And I think anecdotally speaking to a number of our clients and a number of other organizations, I think banks are taking a fairly cautious approach to this regulation. And the rationale for them is that they have a lot of work to do in order to just comply with the regulation, let alone start to deliver additional services off the back of it. So I think what you will get with PSD2 is you will get large organizations looking to meet the requirements of the regulation, because clearly they have to do that. It's a law that they will be complying with. And they will be taking a very, very interesting view on what they think is going to happen because of this regulatory change. And I think what will happen is it will start slowly, but I think it will have a transformative effect on the way that people do payments and run their financial accounts effectively. And what do I mean by that is that I think that third-party providers will start to innovate in this area. And banks will either have a number of choices. They will either have to become a service provider to third parties, or they're going to have to try and compete with these third-party fintech organizations. And interestingly enough, if they do that, then they're going to have to start providing these kind of services that fintech organizations are going to be providing. And they can either do that in a number of ways. They can either use technology themselves and implement functionality. They can either acquire some of these fintech organizations. But they're going to have to compete somehow. And I think the interesting element about this is if they do that, then they will need to ensure that their clients and the third-party providers are onboarded in their organizations in an effective way. Because one of the outcomes, I think, that has not been widely discussed around PSD2 is that I think it's going to create a whole new level of customer service inquiries, investigations, and also potential fraud attempts, because effectively what you're doing is you're opening up the infrastructure of payments to a large number of players, and that creates opportunities for things to go wrong, and I also think it creates opportunities for fraudsters to try and perpetrate fraud within the infrastructure and the ecosystem of the payments environment. And as we know, the banks are going to be pretty much on the hook for figuring out if these things happen, who is at fault, and paying compensation if they're unable to identify those culprits. So there is a vested interest in large financial organizations having in place solutions and services that will be able to manage all of these customer queries and investigations and exceptions and potentially even fraudulent attempts. And I think that is where a platform approach is going to be of use, because people will want to be able to differentiate their services. They will want to be able to rapidly deploy functionality for their clients to meet some of these challenges in a rapid way, because I think this market is going to go through a significant amount of change over the next 18 months. And I think organizations will need to be able to meet that change in a way that enables them to compete effectively with smaller, more nimble fintech organizations. So I think a platform approach for some of these kind of services, I think, is a very, very appropriate use of technology in order to deliver functionality that sits around the requirements that PSD2 is delivering.
No, thank you. I must admit, when we first started talking about this a few weeks ago, my knowledge of PSD2 wasn't particularly great, but it strikes me as being that unusual situation, which is a regulation that is actually transforming the business rather than just trying to control the industry. So an interesting area, I think a very interesting area for what's going to be happening over the next 12 to 18 months. We have one final heading today, and that was when we're going to talk about moving towards a digital culture of change. Now, when we look at cultures of change and change generally, I think it always helps to think about where people currently are and where they're trying to get to. Again, I've got a slide from previous research from one of our workshops, and what it did was it ranked the top onboarding issues that our clients faced. So that's on the next slide. The top of the list, and it's something we talked about before, is the idea of coordination. It goes back to that conversation we were having earlier about how different departments are all involved in the onboarding process. At the moment, most of our clients tell me that the main mechanisms of communication are Outlook and spreadsheet. So not surprising it can take a little while to get things done. So that's issue number one. Second one is poor data. And it goes back a little bit to what Guy was saying as well about is not only making sure you have the right data, but making sure it's in the right place. If you've got the information that's in 5 different systems, then you have a problem. And that ties in with the next point about the idea of having some sort of repository where you have a golden copy, a golden source you can get to. No presentation or no industry area at the moment is complete without talking about regulation, but it is driving our industry and is also driving our industry with relatively short timescales. So being able to be responsive, I think, is something that concerns people. And then we tend to forget it. One of the things that everybody tends to have too much of these days, for some reason, is paper. It's still a major part of what we do and how we do it. And smart organisations are those that are looking at the amount of paper they've got and how they can actually drive that down. And the final point is, particularly on something like outboarding, is around not having a dashboard, not knowing where you are on a project without actually picking the phone up and talking to people. So I've put those up, those top 6. There were a bunch of others. I put those up on the grounds that you look at those and you think about which of these can be addressed with the right technology. Okay, the technology is not necessarily going to be a magic bullet, but without the technology, you're going to struggle to get these things sorted and you're going to struggle to get these things done. We don't mention speed, though. I think at the event, we took it as a given. Speed of response is important. And by that we mean, I think there's 2 things we look at when it comes to speed in this area. One is shortening the process of onboarding from end to end, so it's quicker to get a client on board. But the other thing is actually introducing functionality quickly, which will allow you to respond to the regulator or the client, etc., etc. So both of those are there. Guy, over to you to argue why having a platform can change the way that we approach change.
Okay, for me personally, client onboarding is a key process which has various levels of complexity. If you typically look at how clients are onboarded in any financial services organization, there are a number of different discrete processes that people have to go through. There's the acceptance of the terms, there is the KYC and AML, there might be contracts that need to be signed, there might need to be accounts that need to be set up, there needs to be operational departments that are aware of the services that the organization will be providing the client. It touches many different parts of the organization. And this is a very, very good fit for a digital transformation platform, because it really does bring together people within your organization making decisions and evaluations. It involves managing and controlling the processes by which a client is onboarded and the various departments that are affected by that onboarding process. And it helps to set up the data in the right way so that you have a single view of your customer, and it allows you then to use that single view of the customer for every other interaction that your organization has with that client moving forward. And that is a hugely powerful capability to have within your organization. And I think that a digital transformation platform that brings together all of those elements is the right way to deliver that kind of solution, rather than building it from code up or from buying a out-of-the-box solution. The advantage that a low-code platform has is around the speed of deployment, being able to implement this in a matter of weeks and not months or years. And clearly that has its own benefits in terms of reducing project risk that we spoke about earlier on, but also the cost of implementation. And I also think that a low-code platform fosters collaboration between the business and IT, because it's a language that both sides can understand and be engaged with within the project. And as we know, typically the most at-risk projects are the ones where IT and business don't really communicate in the same language, and it's a huge waterfall project taking many years to deliver and costing multi-million pounds worth of delivery and service fees. And those are the ones that are at highest level of risk of failing. It's when you bring together business and IT and they're working over using a common language that you get much better innovation and much more effective deployment of your solutions and services. So I think, to paraphrase that, the low-code digital transformation platform is absolutely the right way to go for client onboarding and for using it for subsequent every interaction that you have with your client.
Guy, thanks. What I'm going to try and do now is to actually just summarise what we talked about, but I think your last 5 sentences, I think, did that admirably. So I'm not going to try and summarise the summary because I think you've covered it. What we're going to do now, I think, is we've got a few questions coming in. Looking at the first one, I think you probably answered this in flight effectively. It says, I quote, "We touch a lot of systems while onboarding, and yet we still heavily rely on Excel." There you go, Excel and Outlook to maintain records and communicate. How do I get from there to the sunny uplands of low-code platform? I think we're talking about finding an immediate problem requiring a solution, and then taking that as your way forward.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's focus on the specific issue that you have. I also think it's how you deploy, because if you have lots of systems that you touch as part of the onboarding process, and that's fairly typical, but you're still relying on Excel and Outlook, there is clearly a disparate gap between the data that resides in those systems and you being able to access and use it effectively. And this is a very common problem that we see, because what you have is legacy systems are basically systems that you've delivered many years ago but now can't or are unable to enhance or change or develop, either through complexity, cost, or not necessarily having the right people in place in order to do that. That's what a digital platform allows you to do, is to distance your users from those legacy systems and provide them with the data contained within in a way that's consistent, so that in the future, if you then replace one of your legacy applications, what the end user sees is unaffected by that, because the digital platform is insulating you from all of those legacy applications. And platforms come with a whole host of interface capabilities, and clearly there are some systems that don't take the use of an API very easily, and that's when you get technologies like RPA to support you to be able to do the screen scraping, for instance, to get the data out of the system so that a platform can use it effectively across the organization.
I think also, I remember a statistic that says something like 70% of all the data in most organizations is unstructured, and that's certainly the case with CityIQ when I look at what we've got and where we've got it. And I think one of the things that having case management as part of your solution is the fact that that information, which would otherwise be hidden in 500 emails and 14 spreadsheets in different places, is all in one place. You can get it there. And I think that's one of the reasons why you can go down this route, get away from that.
Absolutely. So, I mean, case management gives you that structure within your to managing and looking at your data, but it's fairly flexible in the way that that data is actually displayed. I mean, as part of the upload capability that case management systems have, you can attach images, you can attach documents, you can attach voice recordings, all as part of an evidence of a process in a completely unstructured format, but still form part of the audit trail and the history of that process, be it an investigation or a customer query or whatever it is. And that forms then a permanent part of that investigation, so that when you look back and you want to review it from a GRC perspective, you have all of the information available within that case to understand how the person arrived at the decision that they eventually did. You have all of the escalation points, you have all of the KPIs and SLAs to manage and to understand how the process was effectively completed, and whether that was done in a way that met your SLAs and KPI requirements. And I think all of that auditability is an essential part of being able to run any process these days, because people will want to look back and understand how and when you made those decisions. And I think a platform approach to that gives you all of that information.
We've got a couple of other questions here. Which one will I do next? Oh, how about open question? How do I know if my onboarding process is any good? That's a good question. Do you want to go first or not, or shall I?
You have
I'll have a go on that one. It's something I think came up in one of our previous events, and I think there's two ways to look at the question. I think there's two things that question asks. One is this doing the job well enough? And the other part of it, how does it compare to other organisations? Now, if you can get a client on board in 2 weeks with a few errors, you might think that's okay. But if your competitors can do it in 2 days and with 0 errors, then it's clearly not. You might actually be performing the various tasks to your own satisfaction, but if your competitors can do it in a far shorter period of time, then you're going to be behind the curve. A lot of organisations we talk to don't necessarily know what their competitors are capable of. 1 or 2 at our last workshop had gone out there in the marketplace and they'd been surprised at the variation in what clients and other interested parties in the market were telling them, and it made them go back and think again. So, don't be surprised if there are things that you can do to improve what you've got, but don't also be surprised if there are bigger steps you can take if you want to actually keep up with your competitors.
Yeah, I think benchmarking is always against your peer groups is always important. I think sometimes it's difficult to actually get access to this information so that you actually can make meaningful comparisons. And again, going back to this whole platform approach, being able to get data out of your onboarding process effectively so that you can then use it to compare is an important part of that peer-to-peer analysis. So it's an important element that you need to be cognizant of, because trying to compare your onboarding process without having the necessary information becomes a very difficult process.
Okay. Something I think we can probably look at. Well, I think I know it will vary from organisation to organisation, but talking about speed of change and how quickly you can look to do things using your tool set or an equivalent tool set. What are the orders of magnitude in terms of how quick things can move forward?
Okay. That's a good question. I mean, we would typically look to have a minimum viable product to go live within a 8 to 12 week implementation timescale. That is not to say that that is the finished product. And again, in an agile delivery methodology, we're not looking to have the completed solution live day one. We're looking to get value to the business in the shortest possible time. So that might mean that we just focus on that part of your problem and deliver to the greatest issue that you have within your organization. The advantage that you have then is that then you can do iterative improvements and you can do iterative additional functionality to the platform. And again, what this then allows you to do is over a program of then can go into months, continually improve that process. This stops it becoming a legacy siloed application because you are continually improving it to meet the current requirements of your business. But it also allows you to deliver value in a much shorter time scale.
Okay, I've got one I'm just going to pick up on quickly, and then we'll back to the group, the rest of the list we have there. One of the points that came through early on, actually just after we finished, someone said you haven't mentioned authentication. Now, as indeed in our heading or in our preamble, authentication, of course, is one of those areas where technology is really starting to change what we do. Going back to my early years in the industry, I think there were 3 ways you can authenticate something. You authenticate something usually requires something you have, something you know, and something you are. And historically, the things that we've always looked on from a financial services point of view is the first 2 of those. It's something you have and something you know. It's a card and a password. It's a token and a password, something on those lines. What's happening now, of course, is the technology has suddenly woken up to the something you are piece. So no longer now is it about something physical. It's about a voice print. It could be a thumbprint, it could be a retinal scan. All of these things are coming into that space. And I think what's going to happen in our industry, particularly when it comes to dealing with the clients, is rather than them having to come along with a piece of equipment to verify what they are, they just turn up and there's something about them that's going to make the difference. Does that sort of tie in with your experiences? Are you seeing anything?
Yeah, we're seeing this more and more. I mean, we've got examples of clients who use voice recognition technology as part of their anti-fraud processes to identify if clients in their call centers are sounding nervous or potentially not giving a full explanation to the questions that they're being asked. So I think that kind of biometric technology is going to play an ever-increasing part of our world, both in the retail space but also in corporate environments as well. Again, it is if you look at this whole idea about strong authentication, which is a key element of PSD2, it's about using a combination of, as you rightly put it, inherent possession or knowledge. The question that you then have to address is how do you do that in a way that's still very immediate and very responsive for the client, without creating the sort of backlog and delays in order to do this strong authentication. The interesting question is that, people are clearly looking for new, quick, immediate services, but there's an inherent assumption that all of these services that are being offered are actually secure. And clearly it is the technologists and the financial organizations who have got to make sure that these processes are secure. So there's a real challenge between adopting these new technologies while still being responsive to our clients' needs and desires for speed and making it secure as well. And I think that integrating these new biometric technologies into an onboarding process, using a low-code platform like Appian, I think allows organizations to effectively use this technology in a meaningful way within their organization.
Nicely put, sir. Thank you. We've got another question come through here, and I think probably given the timings we'll make this the last one. We've got a question which says, have you had experience, I guess this is for you actually, Guy, have you had experience using your solution in asset management rather than retail banking?
Yes, we have. Okay, so within financial services, probably about 30 to 35% of our clients work in asset management, which is, a very different industry to retail banking. But they have many of the similar challenges. They're onboarding clients and counterparties. They have the same due diligence processes, maybe some even more complex processes to go through as they look to onboard clients and then manage that whole customer experience moving forward. So we have a number of clients within asset management, Janus Capital, Aberdeen Asset Management, Leontech, State Street Global Advisors, who use this digital platform in a number of different ways. Certainly client onboarding is one of those key solutions that a number of our asset management clients have implemented. But they also use us in other things. So new product development, for instance, is one I've seen a number of times. They obviously use us within the customer servicing side of their business, but also within their middle office and back office to manage things like cash management or corporate actions processing. And they also use us within their GRC departments to manage how they report on regulatory issues that they have to now include, things like financial crime reporting, for instance. So they are very much making use of this digital overlay platform in order to be able to enhance the functionality and services that they have within their existing IT infrastructure. And I suspect as an industry that's going through a lot of change, both regulatory and from competition, that rate of change within asset management is going to increase. And they're going to need to really embrace agile delivery of applications in the future in order for them to remain competitive within their market.
Guy, I think we are just about out of time. So before we go, do you have any last words to our audience?
From my perspective, I think it's important for organizations who are thinking of going down this route is to engage in a discussion, understand where the issues are within your organization that need to be addressed first, because those will be the areas whereby are a good fit for the kind of platform that we've been talking about today. I think it's really about identifying those burning bridges within your organization that have the immediate requirement to deliver solutions for that are a good fit for an agile platform. And if you can understand that, and if you know what those projects are, then I think you're in a very good position to start implementing a digital platform to help address those issues.
Guy, thank you. Thank you all for listening. Just one final reminder, if anyone is in London on the 14th of June and care to join us for breakfast and to carry on the conversation face to face, then you can register, as I say, from either website. But, well, from both of us, thank you all. Thanks also to Kevin and Cindy for doing the work in the background that no one sees. And thanks again for all of you for listening. So goodbye.
Thank you.